Hello, my name is Wade Skinner. I'm the pastor of Beckville Methodist Church, and I'd like to thank you for listening to this sermon. It is our hope and prayer that you are transformed into an equipped disciple of Jesus Christ because of watching and listening to this sermon. God bless you.
In our culture and in most modern Christian churches, the concept of service, it's the title of our sermon today, service. Remember, we're in this series on core values, right? And we're nearing the end of it. We got 2 sermons left. Some of you may be cheering about that. But we've got 2 sermons left, and today we're talking about service. Service, all right? And so, in our culture and in most modern Christian churches, the concept of service is connected to and often conflated with what many have called the social gospel. How many of you have heard that phrase before, the social gospel? All right. Well, the phrase social gospel refers to the broad Christian movement in America during the early decades of the 20th century, leading up to World War II, where the church began to shift its focus from individual morality to social issues affecting large groups. The Methodist Church reflected this shift at its 1908 General Conference, where it established the Social Creed, which asserted, quote, equal rights and complete justice for all men in stations in life. That's a quote, by the way. Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty good, maybe, right? Perhaps even noble, especially when applied to vulnerable groups of people. And there's a very real sense in which the notion of serving people in need, whether we're talking about individuals or groups of people, is a good thing. Can we all agree on that? Absolutely. However, whenever acts of service, such as feeding the hungry, healing the sick, visiting widows, advocating for the poor, clothing the naked, caring for orphans, etc., whenever all of those things that we call acts of service become secularized by removing the why of the gospel, such service becomes empty and meaningless. The best reason that these movements can come up with for doing acts of service for people in need is that, quote, it's a good thing. Or, quote, it feels good to do something for someone in need, unquote. Or, here's another one. I have to put on the right face. It's the right thing to do. Now, while that line of reasoning might temporarily satisfy people who are too lazy to think, or those who are incapable of asking and answering hard questions, ultimately doing acts of service because of some vague, secularized notion of right or good will leave both the giver and the receiver uninspired and deeply unsatisfied. This is why liberal denominations such as the United Methodist Church ultimately fail, and why we need to distance ourselves as far as the east is from the west from them. You see, Satan loves it when people disconnect service from the gospel. In short, Satan loves the social gospel because he hates the real gospel. Social gospel is nothing more than a sham version of the genuine article, but it looks enough like the real gospel so that those who are immature in their faith or unbelieving are fooled by its charm. If I stood up here and in this hand I held a real apple and in this hand a fake one, right? And they both looked identical, it would be very difficult for you to choose the authentic and real one, would it not? That is precisely the kinds of trickery and deceit that Satan loves. Slight shades of difference, close enough, just enough truth to mislead. Make no mistake, it is a counterfeit designed from the pits of hell to distract believers from sincere acts of service, rooted in self-sacrificing servitude of Jesus Christ. The main idea that I have before you today is this: Christian service finds its meaning in the gospel because Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve. I've got 3 points. Jesus serves God, Jesus serves people, and finally, Christian service imitates Jesus' service. Let's go. Jesus serves God. In the passage that I read to you just a minute ago, Jesus says, "The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Now, Jesus refers to himself in a strange way, doesn't he here? In the third person. He says, the Son of Man. He doesn't say I, or me, or my. He says, the Son of Man. And so, you may ask, well, why not just say, I came not to be served, but to serve and to give my life? Why talk about himself in the third person like this? This is strange. I mean, if I stood up in front of you all today and I said, well, you know, the pastor of Beckville Methodist Church is going to deliver a sermon today on service, you would all go, that's strange. So Jesus, what are you up to? Well, Jesus is doing this intentionally. He's calling himself the Son of Man for a very specific reason. Where does this come from? Well, to understand why Jesus is talking this way, you have to know that this phrase is the title of the Jewish Messiah promised to come way back in the book of Daniel chapter 7, where the prophet Daniel reports this vision. He says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Now, in the Hebrew Old Testament, there are plenty of references to humans with the phrase Son of Man. This designation is meant to call attention to our human ancestry. It's also meant to call, which goes all the way back to Adam. Son of Man is nomenclature that highlights our humanity, our biological descent from humans, and all of the limitations of being a human as opposed to being a spiritual being. It is a reference to how small and powerless human beings are compared to God and his angelic host. And so we read things like this in Psalm 8:4. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Now, this passage from Daniel is very interesting, isn't it? Because we see Daniel's vision of the Messiah sent from God to rescue Israel as one, quote, like a Son of Man. But the difference here is that this Son of Man comes from the clouds of heaven and and has special access to the Ancient of Days. He is presented before him. And look what is given to this Son of Man. Dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples and all nations and all languages should serve him. Everlasting. Never goes away. Never passes away. This Son of Man, in other words, is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He is God himself. This is Jesus' favorite phrase, by the way, to talk about himself in the Gospels because it expresses the duality of his character, that he is fully and completely divine and fully and completely human. One at the same time. Jesus is a seeming contradiction, a paradox, an anomaly. God and human together in one. Now, it's incredibly important that Jesus calls himself Son of Man here when talking about why he came. He says that he did not come, quote, to be served. Did you catch that? But the passage from Daniel about the Messiah says that his dominion and glory and kingship are given to him for the purpose that, quote, all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. What's going on here? Why does Jesus intentionally refer to himself as the Messiah, given dominion over all people everywhere so that they should serve him, and then tell his disciples that he did not come to be served? Jesus, are you confused? No, Jesus is not confused. Such a statement would seem to undermine his claims of messiahship until one understands the Old Testament Hebrew prophecies about the Messiah as the suffering servant. In particular, the prophet Isaiah says in chapter 42, "Behold, my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be discouraged till he has established justice in the earth. And the coastlands wait for his law." And then just a few chapters later in the same book, Isaiah says, "Out of the anguish of his soul," talking about this suffering servant, Messiah, "he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities." You see, what Jesus was doing, even though on the surface it seems very confusing, is he was actually clarifying the confusion by the first century Jews about the identity of the Messiah. Is he this powerful king coming down out of the clouds to rule over the entire universe? Or is he a servant come to suffer for the sins of Israel? Which is he? Yes. Both. He's both. You see, the Jews of Jesus' day and Jesus' disciples did not understand that the Messiah's coming was broken into two dispensations. With the first, he comes in humility as a poor servant, subject to the limitations of humanity, who's judged and murdered by sinful human beings. And with his second, he comes in power as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who has dominion and glory and power over all, and who judges the living and the dead. What Jesus is telling his disciples here is that while the Son of Man is King of Kings and Lord of Lords with dominion over all, his mission during his first coming is to serve, and one day he will be served by all nations and peoples What Daniel is talking about in his vision of the Son of Man's dominion, friends, is nothing short than worship. Nothing less than worship. You see, in Scripture, worship and service to God go together. Over and over again in the Hebrew Old Testament, God warns the Israelites not to, quote, serve foreign gods, but to serve Yahweh only. Jesus' response to Satan confirms the connection between worship and service to God when Satan tempts him by offering him rule over the earth if he will fall down and worship him. And what does Jesus say? Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Jesus tells his disciples, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money or your possessions. So when Jesus tells his disciples that he came to serve, he first means that he came to serve God as the ideal Israelite, Son of Man. The Greek word that Matthew uses here is a broad term that encompasses all acts of service, all forms of it, whether service to God or service to humanity. It can mean all forms of service. And so when Jesus quotes this passage in response to Satan's invitation to worship him, he's using a very particular Greek word that specifies the type of service that's carried out in religious worship. When Jesus quotes this passage to Satan, he is reminding us that worship and service are connected. He reinforces this connection when he says that no one can serve two masters. Although it is not necessarily the case that anything or anyone you serve means that you worship that thing or person, it is always the case that what we worship, we will serve. So if worship is an inward disposition of the heart whereby we ascribe ultimate value to something or someone, service is what we are willing to do for whatever we have ascribed ultimate value to. And so if it's not God, it's going to be someone or something else. You see, you were made to worship. Did you know that? Humans were made to worship. And service is the outward actions that indicate where the real treasure of your heart is. Jesus was the only Son of Man who ever served God perfectly. All of his actions reflected a heart perfectly oriented in worship to his heavenly Father. And so I love this story of Jesus when he was 12. It's the only story of Jesus' youth that's presented in the Gospels. And in that story, we're told that Jesus' family went to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And as they were leaving, they unknowingly left Jesus behind. They had a big group of people. They were family and friends. And, you know, the kids are mixed in and they're running around and doing this. And they're all walking and talking. And they get distracted. And a day into the trip, they look around and they say, where's Jesus? He was just here. And they look all over the place and they can't find him. And so they go back to Jerusalem, a day's journey. They spend another day looking for Jesus in Jerusalem. They can't find him anywhere. And finally, someone says, oh, he's over here. He's in the temple, debating the religious leaders and the rabbis. And I love this. It's so wonderful. He's in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Luke tells us that when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, listen to what he says. "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" That on the surface, that sounds disrespectful a little bit, doesn't it? But the closer you look at that, you realize something about Jesus. And a better translation, by the way, of that would render it, "Did you know that I must be about my Father's business?" You see, there's a little Greek word here that means to be under necessity of happening. It denotes compulsion of any kind. It means that he had to. He had to be there. Are there things in your life that you have to do? I mean, you have to. If nothing else gets done, this thing, you have to do it. You want to know about have-tos? Go talk to an addict. Let me tell you, an addict will sacrifice job, relationships, people, sleep, money, everything for the addiction. Why? Because they have to. They have to have it. You know, ultimately, at bottom of addiction is worship. The addict is worshiping at the altar of his addiction. And wherever he is, whatever he's doing, he has to have it. He serves that master, and everything else comes in a distant second or third or fourth. When people tell me that they don't have to go to worship on Sunday, I immediately want to know whose business they have to be about. Who's ordering your life? Who are you, or what are you serving? That this becomes optional. Jesus worshiped God alone. Therefore, he had one singular focus in his service. He had to be about his Father's business. Whose business are you about today? Ask yourself what it is that you have to do each day. And friends, that is what or who you serve. Point 2, Jesus serves people. The Son of Man came not to serve, to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. The end of Jesus' statement here indicates that his service to God extends to serving people in the most self-sacrificial way possible. To quote, give his life as a ransom for many. In our modern context, the word ransom most often refers to a payment for the release of prisoners or people who have been kidnapped. In ancient times, the Greek word lutron, which is translated here as ransom, referred to the price of release for a slave, a doulos. Slavery or indentured servitude in ancient times could easily happen because people slipped into debt. And so the only way that they had, the only choice they had, either go to prison or be forced to sell yourself into slavery until you can pay it off. And so the only way to free an indentured servant or slave, a doulos, was to pay his lutros, his ransom, the price to liberate him from his slavery. What Jesus is saying is that in his act of giving up his life, he's paying the cost for our freedom. The Bible tells us that we're all slaves to sin. As a matter of fact, Jesus himself tells us this. Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Do you know what your freedom cost Jesus? Part of his life. A little bit. Half of it. Everything. It cost him everything. You see, Jesus took your place as a slave so that you could take his place as a son. Not just any son, but a special, firstborn, beloved, one and only son who gets the lion's share of the inheritance. Nothing less than his life will pay the cost for your freedom. This is why when Jesus does the unthinkable and gets up during that Last Supper with his disciples and he takes off his outer garments, we're told, and he grabs a towel and wraps it around his waist, and they're all looking at him going, what's he doing? And all of a sudden, he gets down on his knees and he starts washing their feet. And they're all looking at each other like, what is going on here? And Peter, of course, who always says something, says, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus looks at Peter and he says these words, Peter, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. What is Jesus saying but that his service to humanity in giving up his life as a ransom is the only way. He must serve us in this way or we will have no share with him. When Christ washes you, your share, your portion, your meris, where we get the word merit, your inheritance is with him. You get treated as a firstborn, special, one and only son because he paid the cost of our freedom with his life. Jesus gave up his heavenly seat on the throne of God to be a son of man, subject to all the limitations of humanity and the pain of living in a sinful world with sickness and hunger and pain and sorrow and poverty, injustice, vulnerability, and ultimately death. What an inexpressible gift, Paul says, one that we could never pay back. Peter could not see what a desperate situation he was in before God. Only the perfect sacrifice of God's one and only special Son could wash him clean. It took the blood of God's spotless Lamb to wash us, friends. Nothing else will do. Some of you today are trying to wash your sin away with your own efforts. You have yet to see that the price is too high to pay on your own. You see, you need a Redeemer. You need a Lutrates, someone to pay your debt. I'll be forever haunted by Lady Macbeth, who after conspiring with her husband to murder the King of Scotland in an attempt to overthrow the throne, is unable to free herself of the guilt of that murder. And so in a frenzied sleepwalk, she frantically rubs her hands together while she proclaims, "Out, damned spot, out!" trying to wash the blood that she imagines covers her hands. Shakespeare, in his brilliance, conveys what we are all doing in our sin and guilt and shame. All the perfumes of Arabia, says Lady Macbeth, will not sweeten this little hand. Only Jesus can wash away your guilt, your shame, and all of it. And he does it by paying the ransom for our sin. Finally, Christian service imitates Jesus' service. This is an incredible passage, and in it, the context of Jesus' statement that he came not to serve but to be served is incredible. You see, Jesus' disciples were confused about what he was doing. They didn't know that he had to die. He had to serve. He had to give up his life as a ransom for them. And so they thought that Jesus was there to set up a new political rule, a new kingdom there on earth, an earthly kingdom with a kingship and with an executive cabinet, right? And all the things that would free the Jews from their Roman oppression. And what they realized very quickly was that Jesus' kingdom was something other. And so when they come to him, Jesus says something incredible. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. That's not strong enough. What is Jesus saying? The world's kingdoms are characterized by a power dynamic between those who have it and those who don't. Those who are rulers, those who are in positions of power, and those who are not, and the rest. And what Jesus is saying is that my kingdom is upside down. If you want to be great in my kingdom, you have to first be a doulos, a servant, a slave. That's the way to greatness. Jesus is redefining what it means to be a part of his kingdom. And I love this, in Mark chapter 8, Jesus says, he articulates the upside down nature of his kingdom. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. Are you here today trying to save your life, trying to wash away your own sin? Look, the only way that you'll ever be free to serve others is if you know that Jesus himself committed the greatest act of service for you. He modeled it for you. He showed you what it looks like. Ultimately, what it looks like. And now, guess what? You're free. You're free to serve other people because you know that Jesus has served you in the most profound, meaningful way that could ever happen. And so wherever you're at, whatever gifts, whatever abilities you've been given by God to serve other people, the Lord can and will use you when you put your faith and your trust and your hope completely in him. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you so much for watching this sermon and listening to it. If your life has been transformed because of watching it, we'd love to hear about it. Please send us an email at beckfulgmc@gmail.com. And let us know how we can support and encourage your relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. God bless you.